Hey, welcome back to the Gilbertson Aero Factory. Today is Monday, the 6th of January, 2025. I got that right on the first try. It's about 1:30 in the afternoon. I've got maybe three and a half hours that I can get some work done out here. Most of the stuff that I needed to have primed is good and ready to go. I just have to take out the top skins and hit the rivet lines, but those are, I'm not getting into riveting those right away. So I'll be able to start riveting this stuff while that stuff dries, although it is what it is, man. It's cold outside. It's 54 here in the garage, but it's cold and windy. And so once I start spraying, it's gonna be like a gas chamber in here. So by the way, this respirator, I've had since 2003 when I was painting rubber rifles in New Zealand when we were making Last Samurai. So I got a new one today. This one's going away. I think that maybe the only thing this was good for is making my face sweaty. I don't know if that has actually offered any protection. So that one's gone. Generally in the corner of shame. We'll go with the new one. We'll get started on that. And I guess that's it really for the introduction. Yeah, let's build an airplane. Okay, let's get into some of that high-speed action. So when I was saying it was cold outside, yesterday it was 76 and rainy, and then late in the afternoon, thunderstorms, tornado watch the whole day. And then the temperature after that frontal passage, which didn't drop, I mean, it went from like 76 to like 66 or something. But by morning, it was like 28. It really dropped overnight, and it's been windy and cold, locally cold, relative terms, but it has been cold all day, like low 40s, which in this humid environment feels pretty dang cold. Anyways, so that's why I can't go outside and do any priming, because it's not that it's too cold, it's that it is too windy. The wind's really howling out there. And so for a few minutes here, you get to watch me struggle trying to get this new respirator fitted to my face and get the correct filter on there. Like I said, I had that other one, and now I hadn't been using the other one since 2003. I literally just used it in like the winter time, I guess summer, Southern Hemisphere, in New Zealand for a couple of weeks of painting a few hundred rubber rifles for the Japanese Imperial Army before we started filming The Last Samurai. And then a couple years ago, before I moved here to Texas from LA, my boss gave me this big blue steel box that we'd had in one of our trailers. And when I was getting it unloaded here and going through all the drawers, there was my respirator. So it had been sitting in that thing for, at that point, 19 years. So I used it then, and then I've used it a little bit while working on this project. But the fact remains, I don't really think that was offering any protection. I'm sure any kind of material that was in those filters had probably broken down over time, but it made me look like I was being safe. Anyways, yeah. I was able to do the spraying in here, and it wasn't a big deal. What I ended up doing, and I guess you'll see it here in a moment, was I took the garage door. I was able to open it just a crack, put a fan on the floor, blow the fan out that side, and the other garage door I opened it up, and it just sucked everything right out of there. It wasn't a problem at all. But what am I doing here? Okay. The first thing that you need to do when you start riveting these things, I'm not really sure why it's not really necessary that it's first. It just has to get done. But in the instructions, it's first, and that is the big. What am I trying to say? The thick bracket that we fabricated needs to be riveted to the inboard portion of that forward spar, and I
I'm going to carefully study the rivet callouts and make sure that I'm doing the right thing here. And you may have noticed a moment ago that I was kind of flipping those things around. I've been so careful about keeping the orientation correct with these parts. I have a left bench, I have a right bench. The garage door is the front of the airplane, so I can build the two flaps simultaneously and always keep the orientation correct. And so I hung up those parts on that blue rack over there to prime them. And again, I had them left, right, separated. Everything was good. But what I forgot was that as I was priming them, I spun the rack around to spray the backside. And so when I took them off the rack, I put them at exactly the wrong table. Anyways, it's pretty obvious at this point which one is correct, because those brackets are handmade and drilled, and so they're not completely symmetrical. They're not going to match the other. They're only going to match the one that they originally match drilled to. Anyways, so it all worked out. Today was a very successful session and kind of interesting, the results. So you see me, I sprayed those things. I've got the air blowing out there. I still wore the respirator for the next 20 minutes. And I couldn't smell any paint, but I have a new respirator on, so maybe that's it. And then finally, after 20 minutes, I took it off, and there's not a whiff of that primer in there at all. So that actually turned out to be very effective, having that fan blow exhaust air out while the other garage door is letting air come in. That being said, what you see me doing here is attaching the ribs to the bottom skin. Remember that there is, at the back of this bottom skin is sort of a fake, like a pseudo rear spar where the skin curls up. And there are some AN470 rivets that need to be attached to that before you do anything else here. And Tim experienced this. It's not called out in the instructions. You can look at the exploded diagram and see that those need to be riveted on and what kind of rivets, but you're not told to do this in the instructions. And if you don't, you will probably end up closing up your flaps with Clecos inside, because they will fit, and Tim almost did that. So that's the first thing I'm doing, is making sure that those are taken care of. And the flap that's nearest to us on the screen in the foreground, that's the left flap, and that's the one that I had to create little shims where the interior ribs meet that back spar, that fake back spar. So there's a little bit of fishing around to get those little tiny pieces in their place, but that all worked well. These rivets all set well. This left flap, I couldn't go with exactly what the rivet call out was on the plans, because I've added thickness there with those shims, and it wasn't an AN470-4, nor was it an AN474-5. It was in between. Not on all of them, but I think on one or two of them. So I think in a few minutes you'll see me wander over to the Scotch-Brite wheel and trim down a couple of rivets so that they're correct length, so they will set properly. Yeah, that's how that went. You see I've gotten rid of the respirator. It's fine. It's not a gas chamber. It was a gas chamber all night for sure, because I sprayed that stuff. Nothing was open. And what I did is right inside, when you see me walk from the garage through that door on the back right, that goes into my laundry room. So last night I just ran the fan in the laundry room all night to keep any of that lovely, what is probably carcinogenic aroma from drifting into the rest of my house. The rest of my house can just, smell like the usual coffee and bacon. What else is there to say about? Okay, so there are probably a few different ways to skin this cat. The plans, they don't tell you to. They just simply suggest, hey, this might be a spot where you'd like to have V wedges like you used when you were assembling the empennage, and you saw me get those out in the previous video, and they're kind of sitting on the floor by the wings there. to cradles to hold this thing while you're riveting it together. I've seen other people, if you look at the way that they are right now, I've seen other people who have entirely riveted these ribs to the bottom skin in this state. A lot of them will back rivet these on before they put the top skin on. And other people will put the top skin on but not cleco the top side of it, so they have a lot of room to work in there. And still others have told me that they made a cradle just for this shape using one of these ribs, so a much narrower cradle than what we used on the empennage, because it kept it all nice and tight. So what that tells me is that if they did that, then as tight as that is, apparently you can get in there and rivet it. So what I decided to do after getting all of these aft rivets, attached, was to go ahead and fully assemble one of these ribs and see what I felt about it, if there was enough room for me to get my hand in there with a bucking bar and buck those. And so that's what we're getting into right here. I do have a billion clecos on that thing. I put a cleco in every hole because when I was doing those aft rivets, I just wanted to make sure that everything was tight as it could possibly be. So at this point, I am clecoing the whole thing together, everything except the forward spar, because that essentially closes off everything. So obviously you need to leave that off so that you can get in there, because you have one long row of rivets. It's really easy to see here on the left flap, which is in the foreground. You can see those rivet holes that run the whole width of the flap. That is where the bottom skin is overlapped by the top skin, and they're both being riveted into that pseudo aft spar. And once we get this thing all clecoed together, that's the first thing to do, is to run that whole length, get it all riveted on. A area of concern for me in terms of just the space to work is, if you look at the one in the foreground that doesn't have the top skin on, you can see that the end ribs protrude a good distance past that aft spar. And that gets really, really tight down there. And it's not such a big deal for the outboard rib, which is the one that's closest to us, because the flange opens to the outside. So you can squeeze all of those rivets. And in that skinny portion, at least you can get the trailing edge bucking bar in there and buck those. On the far end, which is the inboard end, the flange opens to the inside of the flap. So you don't have any access from the outside, and it is extremely tight down there. And if you look straight in there, you can actually see that there's a channel where, if you're crazy, maybe you could get a long bucking bar down there, but that was intimidating. But anyways, going back to the exploded diagram back there on the steel shelves, those are intended to be, they're called out as pull rivets. So you don't have to worry about that, which means that let's see, I've started the riveting. You see me working with the light, checking the rivets, and I don't know, these weren't particularly difficult to set. The space is really tight. In fact, I'm going to throw up a picture right here to show you how tight that is. Okay, let me explain what we're looking at here, because I know this is kind of hard to tell what you're looking at. The camera didn't really want to take a picture in this tight spot. On the left, you see the forward flange of the inboard rib, and in there, that is my right hand. The palm is facing up. You see my little finger, you see my ring finger, and then there's a tungsten bucking bar laying on top of my middle finger and index finger. And there's just enough room for me to get that bucking bar all the way forward where that aft row of rivets is, and enough room for it to fit cleanly underneath the rivet, so I can get good solid contact and still be able to buck them really nicely. This turned out to be some of the cleanest riveting I've done in quite a while, so I was really happy with that, and surprised that I was able to work in that space like that. And you see that I'm not working on a cradle. For the way that I'm riveting this, at least this portion of it, it's much easier to be able to rivet straight downward So this turned out great. Another thing that I wanted to mention, when I went over and helped him on Saturday, I was using his rivet gun, and he has his gun set really, really light, much lighter than I have mine set. And I wasn't used to that. I think that way back in the early days, the empennage, when I was shooting these 3/32 rivets, I had it set really light. But after a while, especially getting into the beginning parts of the wings, there was so much jumping back and forth between -4 rivets and -3 rivets that I just left it turned up a little bit higher and would rely more on finesse for these smaller rivets and trigger control. But doing all that stuff with Tim the other day, I realized, especially when you're working at weird angles, it's much easier to have the rivet gun set so that when you fully depress, like a full pull of the trigger, you still can't overdrive the rivet. So before I began this riveting session, I spent maybe 5 minutes kind of getting it dialed in, and I'm really happy with the way that it's working right now. It's much less anxiety inducing when you don't have to worry about pancaking a rivet on one short pull. And it is easy to over control or poorly control the trigger when you're working at odd angles, because so much of what you're doing is just trying to control to manipulate the gun to be in the proper angle that it is on top of the skin, and you lose some dexterity. It's a long way of saying it's really easy to do a bad job when you're at a weird angle. So anyways, this went really well. I think in the beginning part of this, you see me going frequently down with the light, looking at it, trying to check it. One thing that I can't really do is get in there with a rivet gauge. That ultimately the space of where we're riveting is, I'm going to say, 1.5 inches. And I think at some point here, what you'll see me do is come back to the toolbox and grab a 6-8 inch piece of black plastic and tape the rivet gauge onto it so I can reach it in there and check. But yeah, once I felt confident that these were setting nicely, and I kind of knew the rhythm, like how long of a trigger pull I needed and how much pressure I needed on the bucking bar to get a consistent result, it went fairly quickly. It's still not super quick, just because of coming in and out of there. But I did, by the end of this session, get that right flip, the right rib, right flap. Okay, we're going to find the words here. I did get the right flap back rivet row entirely riveted. I don't know, but I think that those are the most challenging rivets to do on this. So yeah, tomorrow tune in, watch me eat my words when I find out that there are others much harder. I kind of got in there a little bit, and it seems like that's the tightest spot I need to get into with the bucking bar in there, and that wasn't a problem. So it may be a little bit awkward working around that curve that's on the leading edge of the top skin, which is laying down on the table as we're looking at it right now. That could be tricky to get that row when it comes time to rivet on the forward spar, but we'll jump off that bridge when we come to it. I'm just happy with how this went today. Easier, this part of it, the riveting so far has been easier than I anticipated. So I'm looking forward to getting back into it tomorrow, I suppose. All you see me doing here is just getting the left flap ready to do the same thing, so that tomorrow I can just go straight into the riveting. Anyways, thanks for being here. This was episode 140, flap 17. Catch you later.